Hi everyone, good night, good morning and good afternoon to everyone in the different time zones today. My name is Pedro Hartung. I'm a lawyer and I'm a legal policy coordinator at Alana Institute in Brazil. It's a pleasure to start this session named Justice Begins in Childhood, the Brazilian experience of early childhood in the judicial system and the role of civil society, organized by Open Society Foundation and Alana Institute, and also the Brazilian National Early Childhood Network and ANDI, Communication and Rights, also from Brazil. And our goal today is to discuss how can civil society work with the justice system. The session aims to demonstrate the importance of the articulation between civil society organizations and the justice system to guarantee the rights of the child, especially by improving and transforming the structure, functioning, and decision-making process of their institutions and the proper training of their agents. Of special relevance in this context is the experience of the National Pact of Early Childhood, coordinated by the Brazilian National Council of Justice, an institution from and also directed and presided by the minister from the Supreme Court. The panelists will also highlight the importance of harmonizing the rights of children with the rights of other individuals as imprisoned parents, especially mothers, by analyzing the judicial leading case of the collective habeas corpus on behalf of imprisoned women and adolescent mothers presented by the Brazilian Supreme Court when their provisional arrest was converted into home arrest. Key content points of the discussions: the judicial system as a leading force in the promotion of children's rights, the National Pact of Early Childhood, the experience here in Brazil, the judicial advocacy, harmonizing children's rights with women's rights, organizing civil society for early childhood advocacy, the Brazilian early childhood legal framework and its intersectoral actions, the role of civil society in the judicial system, and lastly, how to establish an effective dialogue with the judicial system. First of all, a little bit of the context, of the Brazilian context and scenario. We have around 20 million children from 0 to 6 years old as we consider early childhood here in Brazil by Brazilian law, but almost 74% of families of those children have income above minimum age, below actually minimum age, which is a context of extreme vulnerability. But ensuring rights and best interests of children with absolute priority here in Brazil is a responsibility shared by all: families, communities, society, and also the state, including the judicial system itself, which has a duty under Article 227 of our federal constitution to put children first in all their training, structures, budget, management, and decision-making process. We need a more accessible, sensitive, and child-friendly justice system, also during early childhood. The National Pact for Early Childhood is a unique opportunity to bring the issue, so all the topic of children's rights in early childhood, to the center and to the entire justice system here in Brazil, focusing on the legal framework and also particularities or advanced science like neuroscience to all the professionals of the justice system, focusing also topics not related specific to the law, but also to human and children's development. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. André Luiz Guimarães Godinho, which is the Brazilian National Justice Ombudsman and a member of the Brazilian National Council of Justice. In the context of the Brazilian National Council of Justice, he currently is the chairman of the Permanent Commission for the Improvement of the Military Justice and a member of both of the Permanent Commission for Sustainability and Social Responsibility. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to join us live, but he recorded a video to us to talk about this National Pact for Early Childhood.
Boa tarde. Inicialmente, destaco a importância deste 14º Congresso das Nações Unidas sobre Prevenção ao Crime e Justiça Criminal. É assim, a honra de podermos apresentar para importantes representantes internacionais o Pacto Nacional pela Primeira Infância, uma iniciativa de autoria do Conselho Nacional de Justiça que trata do resgate de direitos fundamentais da cidadania brasileira. Peço escusas, desde logo, por estar realizando esta apresentação de forma gravada, mas tal modelo foi adotado para otimizar a tradução e garantir a melhor compreensão de todos. O Conselho Nacional de Justiça, CNJ, é órgão central de planejamento e coordenação do Poder Judiciário, nos termos do artigo 103b da Constituição da República Federativa do Brasil. É atualmente presidido pelo excelentíssimo ministro Luiz Fux, presidente do Supremo Tribunal Federal, equivalente à Suprema Corte Brasileira. Além da função de fiscalização no cumprimento dos deveres funcionais da magistratura, o CNJ tem destacado a atuação no controle administrativo e no desenvolvimento de políticas judiciárias voltadas ao aperfeiçoamento da prestação jurisdicional no Brasil, em consonância com os compromissos internacionais e constitucionais relativos aos direitos das crianças e dos adolescentes. O CNJ deu início ao projeto Justiça Começa na Infância, fortalecendo a atuação do sistema de justiça na promoção de direitos para o desenvolvimento humano integral. O Marco Legal da Primeira Infância, Lei 13.257 de 2016, é uma lei inédita no mundo e prevê a promoção do direito ao desenvolvimento integral na faixa etária, que vai desde a gestação aos 6 anos de idade. Esse período foi evidenciado pela ciência como o mais determinante na formação humana. A princípio, a lei foi construída com maior participação do Legislativo, do Executivo e da sociedade civil. A partir de 2018, iniciou-se a maior participação do Judiciário, com especial destaque para o projeto desenvolvido pelo CNJ, que foi selecionado entre 3.000 projetos, pelo Ministério de Justiça e Segurança Pública, passando a ser financiado com recursos do Fundo de Defesa de Direitos Difusos do Ministério da Justiça e Segurança Pública. O valor do financiamento foi de aproximadamente R$ 7 milhões, e quase todas as áreas técnicas do CNJ estão envolvidas na concretização deste objetivo. Para realizar o projeto Justiça Começa na Infância, o CNJ propôs a construção do Pacto Nacional pela Primeira Infância, firmando, em 25 de junho de 2019, termo de cooperação técnica e operacional, com vistas ao aprimoramento da infraestrutura necessária à proteção dos interesses da criança e à prevenção da improbidade administrativa dos servidores públicos e demais atores da rede de proteção à primeira infância, responsáveis por aplicar a legislação voltada à garantia dos direitos previstos no artigo 227 da Constituição Federal, no Estatuto da Criança e do Adolescente, Lei 8.069 de 1990, e no Marco Legal da Primeira Infância, Lei 13.257 de 2016. Essa última lei tem proporcionado iniciativas de maior governança colaborativa, pois prima pela atuação intersetorial como condição para a promoção do desenvolvimento integral das crianças. Vale destacar que, além do Pacto Nacional pela Primeira Infância, o CNJ teve importante papel no lançamento do Pacto Nacional pela Escuta Protegida, implementado pela Lei 13.431 de 2017, e do Pacto para implementar políticas públicas para a prevenção e combate à violência contra a mulher, também na estreita parceria com o Ministério da Justiça e Segurança Pública. O Pacto Nacional pela Primeira Infância conta atualmente com 102 signatários, representantes das 3 esferas do poder público e da sociedade civil organizada. E tem como plano de trabalho as seguintes ações, sem esgotar outras, que possam ser propostas pelos parceiros. A. Diagnóstico Nacional da Situação de Atenção à Primeira Infância, análise da implementação do Marco Legal da primeira infância. B. Seminários regionais para sensibilização e mobilização interinstitucional. C. Capacitação do sistema de justiça e do sistema de garantia de direitos da criança e do adolescente. D. Seleção, premiação e disseminação de boas práticas. E E. Divulgação dos resultados por meio de publicações. O diagnóstico é fundamental para subsidiar a definição de ações e prioridades sobre a atuação do sistema de justiça e dos demais atores responsáveis pelas políticas, rotinas de atendimento e forma de gestão das entidades responsáveis pela atenção integral às crianças na primeira infância. Após a formação de uma comissão para essa ação, foram definidos os seguintes eixos para a realização de diagnóstico nacional. Eixo 1, mulheres e adolescentes grávidas e mães de crianças de até 6 anos presas ou em regime de internação. Eixo 2, proteção da criança na dissolução da sociedade conjugal. Eixo 3, destituição do poder familiar, adoção e tráfico de crianças. Eixo 4, famílias acolhedoras e unidade de acolhimento. Eixo 5, estrutura judiciária e gestão administrativa de políticas da infância e juventude. Os resultados do diagnóstico indicarão aos tribunais, aos demais órgãos de sistema de justiça e aos signatários do Pacto Nacional pela Primeira Infância os pontos problemáticos identificados, em diversos aspectos, tais como estrutura, equipe, processos de trabalho, interação com os demais atores da rede de proteção e promoção da primeira infância, para que possam, assim, concentrar esforços nas soluções adequadas de cada caso. Para a realização desse estudo, o CNJ firmou um acordo de cooperação técnica com o Programa das Nações Unidas para o Desenvolvimento, PNUD, visando possibilitar a articulação com outras instituições nacionais produtoras de dados e pesquisas, das quais o Instituto de Pesquisas Econômico Aplicado, IPEA, e o Instituto Brasileiro de Geografia e Estatística, IBGE. Para viabilizar a incidência do resultado do diagnóstico na Estratégia Nacional do Poder Judiciário, serão realizadas oficinas regionais de discussão dos resultados e coleta de novos subsídios para fortalecer a atuação do Poder Judiciário e demais serviços relacionados ao tema. Além disso, será selecionada ação para execução experimental ou piloto em serviço do sistema de justiça, buscando aplicar recomendações emanadas das pesquisas, com o intuito de fortalecer as políticas públicas judiciárias voltadas à infância e juventude, bem como será desenvolvida ferramenta tecnológica para divulgação de dados e informações levantados pela pesquisa. Seminários regionais. Outra ação do projeto Justiça, começa na infância, é a realização de um seminário em cada região do Brasil, dos quais 3 já foram realizados, visando sensibilizar os profissionais do sistema de justiça e da rede de garantia de direitos de todo o país sobre a importância do marco legal da primeira infância e, de forma intrínseca, fomentar a implementação da prioridade absoluta prevista no artigo 227 da Constituição Federal. Em todas as edições dos seminários, ocorre a adesão dos atores locais ao Pacto Nacional pela Primeira Infância. Os seminários são destinados a profissionais dos 3 poderes e da sociedade civil organizada, desembargadores, magistrados, procuradores, promotores, defensores públicos, advogados, equipes psicossociais jurídicas, parlamentares, servidores do Poder Judiciário, Executivo e Legislativo, além de profissionais do sistema de garantia de direitos, conselheiros tutelares, conselheiros de criança e do adolescente, servidores da área dos direitos humanos, desenvolvimento social, cultura, esporte, saúde, educação, justiça, segurança pública, institutos, fundações, organismos internacionais, empresários, dentre outros. Em cada região, a programação considera os problemas e as dificuldades enfrentadas pelos operadores do direito e pelas equipes técnicas, assim como as boas práticas implementadas, promovendo a integração da rede de garantias e direitos da primeira infância. Também são propostas em workshops temáticos e simultâneos, ações que podem ser implementadas pelo CNJ e pelos demais signatários do Pacto Nacional pela Primeira Infância. Nas 13 edições realizadas, foram ofertadas 1.400 vagas, e além de terem sido recebidas 2.635 inscrições de profissionais que atuam nos estados da região Centro-Oeste, Norte e Sudeste do Brasil. As questões apresentadas pelos participantes nos workshops foram analisadas pelo Fórum Nacional da Primeira Infância e da Juventude, FONINGE, que emitiu uma nota técnica com a recomendação de elaboração de protótipo de fluxo de integração intersetorial. A terceira grande ação é de capacitação, que inclui a oferta de 23.500 vagas para os profissionais do Sistema de Justiça e da Rede de Garantia de Direitos. O direito dos profissionais à qualificação está destacado no artigo 10 do Marco Legal da Primeira Infância, Lei número 13.257 de 2016. A capacitação será realizada em duas modalidades. Para operadores do Sistema de Justiça, foi planejado o curso Marco Legal da Primeira Infância e suas implicações jurídicas, com 1.500 vagas. Por ser uma área que requer atuação multidisciplinar e intersetorial, o público-alvo desse curso abrange magistrados, promotores de justiça, defensores públicos, advogados e delegados de polícia. Para os profissionais do Sistema de Garantia de Direitos, foi planejado um curso à distância sobre o Marco Legal da Primeira Infância, com público-alvo voltado da rede de serviços da assistência social, saúde, educação, organização da sociedade civil e demais integrantes da rede de atenção à primeira infância. Essa capacitação recebeu o nome de Curso Marco Legal da Primeira Infância para todos e serão ofertadas 22.000 vagas. Com a capacitação, espera-se alcançar melhores resultados na realização de atividades voltadas à primeira infância, com profissionais conscientes de suas responsabilidades e aptos a prestar atendimento humanizado, com qualidade e rigor técnico, buscando propiciar acolhimento personalizado e integrado, com foco na solidificação das bases de formação da criança e sua constituição como indivíduo dotado de especificidades. Espera-se ainda identificar profissionais com aptidão pedagógica para atuarem como multiplicadores do conhecimento disponibilizado no curso, auxiliando no alcance e formação de um número ainda maior de agentes de promoção do desenvolvimento das crianças desde o início da vida. Outra ação do projeto foi a seleção, premiação e disseminação das melhores práticas, por meio da qual se selecionou 12 práticas, subdivididas em 4 categorias: Sistema de Justiça, Sociedade Civil, Governo e Empresas, como mecanismo de fomento e reconhecimento de experiências de sucesso implementadas há pelo menos um ano e que contribuem para a promoção e garantia dos direitos da primeira infância. O objetivo é realizar um benchmark de práticas inovadoras, eficazes e passíveis de replicação em outros órgãos e entidades, visando ao aperfeiçoamento do entendimento prestado pelos agentes públicos e pela rede de atenção à primeira infância. As práticas inscritas foram analisadas por uma comissão de avaliação, composta por membros indicados pelos signatários do pacto. A análise foi dividida em uma fase eliminatória e outra, classificatória. Na fase classificatória, foram considerados os critérios de eficiência, eficácia, inovação, replicabilidade, custos e recursos de implementação, intersetorialidade e alcance social. Atendendo à chamada pública divulgada em 2019, mais de 180 projetos foram inscritos. As 3 melhores práticas de cada categoria foram premiadas como reconhecimento dos esforços empreendidos para a promoção e garantia de direitos e atenção à primeira infância. Todas as práticas premiadas foram objeto de disseminação de conhecimento, visando a sua replicação por qualquer órgão ou instituição interessada, com vistas à melhoria dos serviços de atenção à primeira infância. Para a divulgação de todo o trabalho, estão previstas ações utilizando ferramentas específicas, bem como a elaboração de material gráfico para distribuição em meio físico e eletrônico para toda a rede, entre as quais podemos destacar Cartilha do Pacto Nacional pela Primeira Infância, Cartilha das Boas Práticas, Relatório do Diagnóstico Nacional. Além disso, vale registrar que, para a divulgação das melhores práticas, foram criados fóruns de discussão na modalidade à distância, nos quais os responsáveis pelos projetos já atuam como tutores, prestando orientações sobre metodologias, estratégias e demais aspectos que podem contribuir para a replicação por outros interessados, discutindo-se também a articulação dessas práticas com os princípios e as diretrizes do marco legal da primeira infância. Maiores detalhes podem ser acessados no portal do CNJ. Certos de que essa troca de experiências em muito poderá contribuir para o aperfeiçoamento da cultura de proteção às crianças e a consolidação de uma sociedade mais justa e igualitária, continuaremos trabalhando e ficamos à vossa disposição para quaisquer esclarecimentos. Agradeço a atenção de todos e, de modo especial, a doutora Trícia Cabral, juíza auxiliar da presidência deste Conselho Nacional de Justiça, pela exitosa atuação nesta importante pauta. Desejo paz e saúde a todos. Nosso muito obrigado.
Thank you, Mr. Godinho, for this video and all the explanation about this National Pact for the Early Childhood, which is a very important initiative right now in Brazil to sensitize all the agents and also all the institutions from the justice system. Right now, it's a really important effort to implement children's rights and also to integrate and harmonize children's rights to other provisions, including in the penal justice, which will be a topic that we'll discuss today with Natalie Fragoso in the end of this session. And as Mr. Godinho said, here in Brazil, this new legal framework for early childhood approved in 2016 was crucial to initiate this debate in the judicial system. Although the history of children's rights here in Brazil has different periods, and after our federal constitution from 1988 was very important to really create and craft all the legal framework for children's rights here in Brazil. This new legal framework specific for early childhood was a new powerful force to ignite again all the changes that we need inside the judicial system to have a more friendly judicial system towards children and also their families, including their mothers. But civil society was very important in all those processes, and not just in the judicial system right now, but also before, to approve this new legal framework and also to implement different strategies in the municipal level, the state, or the union level in Brazil. And to talk a little bit about that, I want to invite Madam Miriam Praguita. She is the Executive Secretary at the Brazilian National Early Childhood Network, RNPI, an alliance of more than 200 governmental and civil society organizations aimed at fostering legislation and policies to guarantee children's rights in Brazil. She is also the Executive Director at ANDI, Communication and Rights, a civil society organization that since 1993 promotes freedom of expression and develops tools to support the coverage of human rights issues by the Latin American news media. Please, Madam Miriam Praguita, you have the floor now.
So, hello, it's an honor. Hi, hello. As you say, Pedro, good morning, good afternoon. And it's a pleasure to be here with my colleagues and also with this audience. It's an honor to be part of the 14th Congress of UN Crime Congress that's taking part in Japan now. As Pedro already said, ANDI is a civil society organization that's engaged in coordinating innovative initiatives in the field of media for development. And its mission is to contribute to a culture of promoting the rights of children and youth, human rights, social inclusion, participatory democracy, and sustainable development based on actions involving journalism, information, and dissemination in the field of public communication. And RNPI, as we call the National Early Childhood Network, gathers nowadays 263 members, and its mission is to articulate and mobilize people, organizations, and the media in order to guarantee early childhood rights. It's a plural, democratic compound which embraces institutions of different sectors, dimensions, and profiles. So I would like to give you some main Brazilian challenges for early childhood-oriented policies that we have now in our country. So these challenges are some examples: to attend large number and each child, that's unique and irreplaceable individuals, rights for all in all their diversity, inclusive and present policy in every corner of the country, to reduce inequality and promote the most vulnerable, the urgency that these matters has in itself, because it's 6 years and it depends on how much we invest in these 6 years, it will change the whole life. So demand on quality, it's improve the present offer and ensure quality in expansion, especially when we think about the size of Brazil and all difference that we have in the different regions. Adjust the offer to real children's diverse needs, to guarantee total attention, to articulate sectors on a multi- and intersectoral basis, build a prospective view, insert early childhood in the political agenda of governments or enlarge its presence in the federal, state, and municipal level, to disseminate the interest for children in every sector, political, legislative, administrative, cultural, social, academic, news media, research centers, etc., to give absolute priority to children in the budget and in decisions, to keep on changing the social representation of children and childhood, from fragile and unable to a citizen, subject of rights and dignity, capable and participant, to articulate sectors of public administration, government, and society. Hear, listen, dialogue, and embrace contributions, and establish a stable source of financial resources with adequate amount, early childhood budget. So, since I spoke already a little bit of this scenario that we have in Brazil, so I talk a little about what that we have that protect already us already. It's the legal framework for early childhood that my colleagues already talked, that was passed in 2016. It's going to be 5 years tomorrow. For us, it's the day after tomorrow, but for Japan, it's tomorrow. Reinforcing the state commitment in all levels of the federation to set policies, plans, programs, and services that meet the specific needs of this age range, aiming to ensure its whole development. The legal framework for early childhood has as its objective to implement a number of provisions centered on fostering a culture of full care and assistance that includes creation of public policy committees for early childhood at the municipal, state, and national levels, development of state and municipal plans for early childhood. It's a big challenge that we face in Brazil because we have more than 5,000 municipalities. listening to children and bringing them into the public debate so as to recognize them as subjects with rights and voices to be heard. Even though they are under 6, it's very important to listen to them. They have their feelings and their emotions and their thoughts to share with us. So mobilize and promote the formulation of a specific early childhood public budget, and to support the news media in the coverage of children's rights issues and of scientifically produced knowledge, giving visibility to the variables which have greater influence on early childhood development. We also, as the Early Childhood National Network, we developed the National Plan on Early Childhood, as Pedro already talked a little bit. So inspired by the UN Award of Children document and driven by intensive coordination among the organized civil society, particularly the National Early Childhood Network, Brazil developed its National Plan for Early Childhood in 2010, establishing priorities in relation to policies and programs. And nowadays, we just made a review of the national plan on early childhood. So it's much more complete. So in 2019, the National Council of Justice undertook this unprecedented commitment, spearheading the National Pact of Early Childhood, which aims to promote the enforcement of legal framework for early childhood, as my colleague Godinho just spoke. And so the active presence of the organized civil society in the Pact's implementation processes underscores the viability of democratic and participatory models of cooperation between the judiciary and the civil society organizations. So now I would like to share with you some intersectoriality in civil society outcomes. So organized civil society has for many years advocated in favor of an increase in Brazilian paternity leave standards. Finally, legislation was passed guaranteeing this right to all public civil servants. Furthermore, reports from the Ministry of Health show that a growing number of private companies are voluntarily joining to the paternity leave state-led program that already benefited 55,000 men up to 2020. So another outcomes from the intersectoriality in civil society are that the Happy Child program, launched by the Brazilian government on October 2016, that aimed at fulfilling what's established in the Article 14 of the legal framework for early childhood. In a short period of time, it became the largest home visit program in the world for the promotion of the early childhood development. Up to 2020, more than 24 million visits were registered in 2,600 Brazilian municipalities have joined the initiative. And civil society organizations are strategic partners in the implementation process of this program. And the grant of collective habeas corpus order that my colleague Natalie is going to deep talk about this, that was in February 2018 by the Brazilian Supreme Court, converting preventive detention of pregnant women and mothers with children up to 12 years of age into house arrest, as established by the legal framework for early childhood. This specific measure stems from calls by organized civil society entities, stimulating intense discussions within the judicial community. And so there are 4 factors that ensure the success of the National Pact for Early Childhood that I would like to share with you. The pre-existence of a national regulatory system responsible for guaranteeing the rights of children, fostered by the Brazilian Federal Constitution from 1988 and by the Child and Adolescent Bill of Rights. The organized civil society's engagement in building different networks, coalitions, and movements to ensure children's and adolescents' rights in Brazil, as well as holding and validating these initiatives on a social base. And just to give the example, that ANDI was created when the Child and Adolescent Bill of Rights was created, and ANDI was created at this moment by journalists, so that the journalists could talk with journalists direct, to mobilize, to qualify, and to monitor media. That is what we still do in ANDI and in the Early Childhood National Network. So another essential factors that ensure the success of the National Pact are that public and regulatory policies supported by a network of public managers and congressmen to ensure a political support for such initiatives. And the leadership built by the justice system, coordinated by the major judicial institution in Brazil, the National Council of Justice, which holds trust and legitimacy to create a supra-party environment focusing on the rights of children. So, that was some of the topics I would like to share with you. And I thank you so much. I am Miriam Pragita, and I'm here just at your disposal to answer some questions and also to listen to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Miriam. It was very important, your talk, and highlighting the importance of civil society to really push forward the changes, the institutional changes that we need, because we have a robust and very important framework for children's rights since actually our federal constitution, but the institutions need to change more to really enforce this legislation. And I think that the early childhood new framework from 2016 was very important, because it wasn't just about legal norms, specifically on reinforcing what we already had, but also was about new policies about professional development, about shift and changes in the institutions and legal policies inside the judicial system. So it was bigger, and it was actually a new framework to deal with the complexity of nowadays, really tackling different perspectives of the society, but also the institutional dynamic of the state. And unfortunately, also Eduardo Marino, which is the director of Applied Knowledge Department of the Maria Cecilia Souto Vidigal Foundation here in Brazil, wasn't able to join us today, or this morning, depending on the time zone. And that's why I just want to highlight some important topics that he wanted to share with us today, which is, first of all, Maria Cecilia Souto Vidigal is a civil society organization here in Brazil that aims to develop advocacy strategies of how to translate science to a broader audience, and also to implement science inside the public policies. And they are developing a very important job here in Brazil to really push forward the early childhood agenda in different levels. And they created a science coalition for childhood, which is the NCPI. And together with Bernard Van Leer Foundation, Center on the Developing Child from Harvard University, Dr. Klaas Dave, which is the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, also from Harvard University, INSPER, a university here, and also the medical school from the University of São Paulo, they created the NCPI to develop new science and also to gather information for top-notch sciences around the world on children's development, public policies for children. And because of that, they created a very important program that was an important place to discuss and also to create new leaders for early childhood, including inside the judicial system, which was the Executive Leadership Program on Early Childhood Development, with the Center on the Developing Child at Harvard University. And each year, they brought different leaders from the civil society, from also the government, from the Congress, and different spaces related to the agenda of creating policymakers and decision makers, and also opinion makers. And they brought them to the Harvard University to spend 1 week understanding the science behind early childhood, like neuroscience, public policies. And because of that, they achieved more than 100 action plans related to the early childhood. They were able to bring more than 570 participants from different stakeholders here in the decision-making scenario of Brazil. And also, in the last years, they increased the number of the judicial branch representatives, prosecutors, judges, public defenders, lawyers, and because of that, they were able to create a new movement, also inspiring new leaders inside the judicial system to really bring to the center of the judicial system children's rights and early childhood. And also, it's important to highlight that Fundação Maria Cecília Souto Vidigal, in partnership with RNPI, the Early Childhood Network in Brazil, with Alana, Bernard Van Leer Foundation, UNICEF, they developed different strategies to sensitize these actors and agents, like the development and the production of 2 documentaries that you can see on Netflix all over the world, called The Beginning of Life. And those 2 documentaries, The Beginning of Life 1 and The Beginning of Life 2, they are very key instruments to translate science to a broader audience and to really bring more emotional perspectives and how really what we are talking about today and on these programs, it's about the daily lives of families and children, especially mothers. And to talk about mothers, but in a very vulnerable situation, which is the imprisonment of women in Brazil, I would like to invite Mrs. Nathalie Fragoso. She holds a PhD in Sociology of Law from the University of São Paulo Law School, where she also earned her bachelor's degree. She has an LLM, Master of Laws, at the Ludwig Maximilians Universität in München, Germany. Nathalie was the coordinator of Luiz Gama Human Rights Clinic between 2013 and 2014, and she is a member of the Collective of Lawyers for Human Rights, CADU, since 2015. It's important what Nathalie has to say, because among several changes from the early childhood legal framework, it also established significant changes in the functioning of the judicial system, including in the criminal sphere, amending the Criminal Procedure Code itself. Please, Mrs. Nathalie, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Pedro, for the introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as we are doing right now. Well, I would like to begin. I'll share a presentation with you all in a couple of minutes, but I would like to begin this speech telling you that the story that Miriam told has effects. The story about the creation of the Brazilian early childhood law had effects, had effects that goes beyond the coalitions for children's rights. The mobilization everybody talked about here resonated with other fields, with other organizations in a collaborative process of advocacy and litigation. And that's because the Brazilian early childhood law does not only protect children's rights, it recognizes that the rights of children are not adequately protected if the rights of the mothers are violated. Vulnerable motherhood must therefore be protected and not dismissed, not interrupted. And that's how the story I'm about to tell you begins. An example of vulnerable motherhood is the one of incarcerated women, right? The Brazilian early childhood law provides for the possibility, 2016, for the possibility of substitution of the preventive detention by house arrest. We, the lawyers of the Human Rights Lawyers Collective, also known as CADU in Brazil, monitor the implementation of the law and realized that various excuses kept showing up, kept appearing for keeping women in prison. In light of this, we thought of a class action, a liberty class action on behalf of all women and their sons and daughters because they were subjected to illegal conditions of incarceration. And I'll now share with you the presentation I prepared in order to talk about this issue. There you go. So we are talking about the first collective habeas corpus admitted by the Supreme Court in Brazil, right? It's the habeas corpus 143541. And it was granted, it was presented in 2017, it was granted in 2018, an historic decision. And it was a class action, therefore, presented in favor of all pregnant women, feral women, mothers of children up to 12 years old, and also of the children themselves. The action, as I told you, was presented by the Human Rights Lawyers Collective called CADU. And our premises in this case were that, as with other individual rights, violations of the right to freedom can go beyond the individual, can reach a collective, can reach a large number of people, and can have, therefore, collective effects. The abusive acts, the illegal acts, in these cases, they have a super-individual dimension. If we do not recognize that, and we insist in applying individualized measures to correct this kind of situations, we are not able to seize the violations. We make the patients or the victims more fragile, and also we made it more difficult to realize that the reality we're talking about, the reality we are fighting. And we are talking about the prison system in Brazil, the criminal justice in Brazil. When we're talking about incarceration of women in Brazil, we are talking about more or less 40,000 women incarcerated. The data nowadays in Brazil are not very clear. There are two sources which are quite different in their estimation of on the number of women incarcerated. We are talking, and of course, if we see the whole Brazilian prison population, it seems little. We have more than 800 people incarcerated in Brazil, and the women are just 40,000 women incarcerated. But this number has increased enormously since the year 2000, more than 600% actually. And this incarceration is highly related to drug crimes, to the involvement with drug crimes, and more often not with minor drug offenses. And when we are talking about the imprisonment of women, we are talking about their confinement. We are talking about not only of the deprivation of liberty, but we are talking about the removal of access to prenatal health programs. We are talking about a difficult access or irregular access to childbirth and postpartum care. We are talking about irregular conditions or not ideal conditions of hygiene and self-care. We are talking about an environment which is not adequate, is not prepared to receive children and to actually provide for adequate conditions for a woman to exercise her motherhood. There are several news in Brazil from the years 2017, 2018, which were the years when we were discussing this case before the Supreme Court. And those news were giving notice, were talking about women who, for example, gave birth alone in their cells without any kind of assistance. We had cases of women that just after the birth had to go back to their cells with the children. We're talking about cases in which women had to go through childbirth with handcuffs, and that's the kind of experience we are talking about. We are talking also about prison facilities which do not have a proper space for the children, where mothers cannot feed the babies properly. Of course, Brazil is huge and the institutions vary a lot too, but we are talking about the systematic violation of reproductive rights. We are talking about the systematic violation of children's rights as well. So these precarious conditions in the prison facilities, the fact that they are not adequate to women's needs and to the children's needs, and the lack of attention to the conditions for the exercise of those rights, they characterize inhuman, cruel, and degrading treatment. The temporary imprisonment in this situation goes, of course, beyond what the Brazilian Constitution says that is legal, which is the deprivation of liberty, and that's all that's acceptable under the Brazilian law. And it's also discriminatory, because when we are talking about the imprisonment of women, which is associated with drug trafficking and actually minor drug offenses, and those are crimes which have a very strict discipline, very high penalties, very high. People tend to go to the prison. They cannot wait for the judgment in liberty. So all of that have a disproportionate impact on women, especially Black women, especially women which are in a more vulnerable condition in society. And those were the arguments presented to the Supreme Court, and those were the arguments that led the Supreme Court to grant the collective habeas corpus on behalf of the women and the children, and to determine the substitution of the preventive detention for home arrest for all of those women. Of course, we are not in a position to say that this kind of problem has been is now past. That's not the case, unfortunately. There is still a huge number of women incarcerated. There is still pregnant women incarcerated in Brazil. There are still women that do not have adequate access to prenatal care because they are waiting for a sentence, for a judgment. But we can say that a new way of claiming for rights has been created, has been accepted by the judicial system in Brazil, and we're talking about the collective habeas corpus, which has been used on behalf of adolescents, which has been used on behalf of people accused of minor offenses, which has been used in this COVID context. So that's a huge victory. And also, I guess, and that's the point here, we were able to make it known by every single judge in Brazil that the early childhood law provided protection for women in conditions of incarcerated women and their children. That is, they protect also the rights of women, and they have a right not to be subjected to prison before the conviction, because there is this alternative, which is house arrest. And the alternative, because it's a premise of the law that in order to protect the children's rights, it's necessary to protect the mother's rights as well, to support them in their motherhood. And as one last thing I'd like to share with you, and it was very present in the speech of Miriam and also Pedro, is that this joint effort, which is the Early Childhood Pact, which is the early childhood law in Brazil, is a very it's a paradigmatic case, I would say, in how civil society organizations can work well, can work in a collaborative way, can work from different perspectives in order to bring the protection of rights a little bit to a better place. So from the advocacy in the parliament to the litigation in the Supreme Court, and from there to several advocacy initiatives in talking to judges, in monitoring the implementation of the law, in responding to those various excuses not to substitute the preventive detention by the house arrest. So this is an ongoing process. This is an ongoing effort, and this is a joint effort. And I guess we are in a very different place than we were in 2016, and that's due to the beautiful joint work that has been done in order to protect children's and women's rights, because we have now learned that they are interdependent, that we cannot protect one by violating the other. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Nathalie, for this great presentation, this historical and very important collective habeas corpus. Now we have some time for some questions. I don't know if you guys want to use the chat, please, to bring us some questions. But I have one here already, which is, I think both of you could answer that, which is, how important was the narrative of children's rights and the idea that we need to take care of who take care of children to change the judicial system, or to change the judicial system? Can we sensitize more the judicial system, including the penal system, also bringing to the table children's rights? Do you think that is important and it could be used to really shift and to change these structural problems inside the justice system?
I can try to answer this one, of course, with Miriam later. I would say that although we cannot make it all about the children, because it's important to talk about the women, it's important to talk about the accused, it's important to talk about the criminal justice problems. It was very, very important to bring children into this debate. And why do I say that? Normally, people do not consider the impact of prison, the impact of the prison facilities on children. They do not even consider the existence of children in prisons, which is a reality in Brazil. There are right now children being fed in prisons. There are right now children being gestated in prisons. There is right now children growing up in prisons in Brazil. So this is frequently forgot by people making decisions about prison facilities, by people making decisions on criminal justice. And this has to be remembered, of course. And it was very important, the shifting in law, the shifting in the criminal procedure code came from a law which is a law to protect children's rights, right? So it was, how can I say, it was a law that was not subject to this punitivism, which is usually associated with the debate on criminal justice, with the debate on crime in Brazil. So it was a very important way to shift, as you said, the focus, to shift the terms of the debate and bring light to the fact that there are children in prison facilities and they are highly impacted by what people do to their mothers. Well, when you're talking about the female incarceration, and when you're talking about the incarceration of mothers, we are always talking about the impact extra muros, extra walls, which we must not only consider the impact of prison on women, but we must always consider the impact of the imprisonment of women outside the prison walls. That is, the impact on their families, the impact on their children, the impact of their access on their children, and also the impact, because that's frequently the case, but also the impact of bringing the children in this environment. So that's why when we're talking about women, we must make prison an exception. We must make, especially preventive detention, provisional detention, an exception. And I hope I have answered your question, Pedro. It was very important to bring children in, to mention children, and to, well,
thank you, Natalia. I think you answered very well. And also it's important to highlight that this historical collective habeas corpus also was applied to adolescents from the juvenile justice. And because when we are talking about pregnant women, we can also talk about pregnant adolescents and how they are raising, how they are having their kids inside juvenile justice facilities, which is also an absurd. And also how can we shift this idea and also bring the guarantees that our existing law brings also to the adolescents. So it's a double absolute priority for the baby and also for the adolescent mother. And Miriam, do you want to talk a little bit about this and how really to bring to the center of the judicial system is easier to sensitize judges, for instance, when you talk about children, when you bring children to the table?
So I think that Natalie already spoke almost everything, but it's something that it still have a lot to change in Brazil to sensitize the judges about children. It's something that's cultural in our society, that normally these children between the early childhood, it's invisible in many ways. So it's fundamental that we make this sensibilization, this mobilization of the judges too, because they are also used to behave in a certain way and to have a certain way to look to this small, to the early childhood, to these small people, and not always as citizen with rights. And that's fundamental. It's changing, of course it's changing. And all this that's happening in the pact, it's what we are talking about. It's to make this movement in Brazil. So it's amazing how the pact it's working with. It's giving training to 22,000 people in these departments. It's not the judges only, but all departments of justice. So this is fundamental. And I also understood a little bit in this question that it's important to listen to these children. And I reinforce this. All the children has to be heard. We have to listen to them.
Perfect, Miriam. Thank you again for your ideas and thoughts. And as this UN Crime Congress is also about crime prevention, I think it's very important to state here that when we bring early childhood to the table of the justice system, we are bringing also different arguments about crime prevention also, because we have different researchers and economic researchers and economic Nobel prizes winners that bring to us this evidence that when we invest and when we take care of children, especially in early childhood development, we are also bringing to the society a new aspect of social and economic development. We are also preventing different social issues like crimes, because when we bring people the resources and the tools to better develop, we also we are allowing them to experience their lives and the human development in the different ways, and also to really give them opportunities, to give them the different ways to relate to the government. So it's very important to understand that we are talking here about structural changes, not just in the penal justice system, but also in society and the government in general. I think we don't have any more questions here, but also I want to open for this final idea of yours. Please, let's begin with Miriam. If you want to say something for the end of this session, please.
So I'd like to thank you so much for this opportunity. I really hope that our experience in Brazil inspires another countries, and we are keeping this work. So we still have a lot to do, and we are committed to this, and we are going on. So it's this, when we have the space to debate, to think, to share, we learn a lot, and that's so important. And so I thank you again and again for this opportunity. Okay?
Thank you, Miriam. Please, Natalie.
Hi, thank you. I also would like just to acknowledge this wonderful opportunity to be here and talk to you about this special subject. As Miriam also said, it was a great experience working on this case with other lawyers of CADU, and that is because it was a collective effort. It was an effort that we made in different arenas. It was long term, so I guess there is a lot to inspire there. I agree with you, Media, and not only to for people outside Brazil to see, but for people in Brazil and for us to repeat it, because it involved advocacy in parliament, involved national litigation on Supreme Court, involved litigation on the lower courts, involved litigations on the custody hearings. It involved so much, and research, because the collective habeas corpus was heavily based on empirical research, as well as the advocacy work in the parliament, as Pedro mentioned also. So I guess we have learned a lot from this experience, and what we learned is that structural problems, structural issues, interdisciplinary issues must be addressed in a plural way, in a interdisciplinary way also, in in a joint way, opening space for people from different backgrounds and different perspectives and different fields to join and say their piece and help those, long standing problems in Brazil to be addressed, to be overcome. So it has been a pleasure to be here, to talk about this issue and to work with you both, and also all that could not be here, in order to protect children's and women's rights.
Thank you very much, Natalie. It was a pleasure to also have you here, have you also, Miriam. Thank you, Mr. Godinho, for your video and participation. And also I want to thank very much Vich Vivarta, Marina from Open Society Foundation for helping us to organize this session, also Sarah, Pamela, and everyone that helped us today to bring this message, to bring this initiative. And we also want that you from different countries could also implement this strategy, how to really change judicial systems for a more child-friendly, for a more women-friendly, so we can really transform how we treat human beings in the end, from the beginning of their lives. Please share this session, these presentations, and feel free to contact us so we can discuss it further in different sessions and dialogues. We're very happy to help you to develop in your country these ideas, because we believe that we can really join forces to change our judicial systems. So thank you very much for attending this session, and hope you guys have a wonderful Congress.